And so we do not have a quiz to recall from last week, but we will do our class with our Google Classroom, get started. And so find my Google Classroom. So, okay. So we're going to talk about landscape design and Elizabeth Killinger. Ekstrom now, she was Elizabeth Killinger when she did the presentation. She has since married, and you'll see her name is Elizabeth Killinger Ekstrom. So that is who is presenting on that. There is a very nice presentation that I sent out ahead that you can watch for your benefit. That will make a lot of this fun, and we'll do some different things here. So we're going to do a bunch of online games. This class has lots of online games to do and to check out. And so it'll make a lot of sense to you. If you have not watched the video, you'll be able to go back and say, aha, and maybe you'll pick up some nuggets of information from us in our discussion as we go on. So let's go and do our first one. So these are the vocab ones from Jeopardy type. A pictorial representation of an item in a landscape plan. A pictorial representation. So basically, there's a picture in the design. So think of that. Look at the answers here and see what you think. Kind of think it's a graphic? Okay. That's right, it's a graphic. And so you will see different graphics planted in a design, and it'll be part of the bigger piece, but you will have lots of graphics mixed into that design as a full functional document. So that's really important. So that's correct, because it's not going to be the designer. The designer is the person that's doing that. Texture is, texture can be foliage, it can be plant material, it can be color. So, and then functional diagram is a working diagram of the drawing. So by basically kind of going through process of elimination, it makes sense. The reoccurrence of an event or thing, such as repeating elements within the landscape. Repetition. Yes. And you'll see repetition. So it has a theme or it has a flow. So the landscape will have a flow, and you will see that repetition go on in different parts. It may tie elements in together where you will see that, or it'll reinforce a theme. So that's where we have repetition. Okay, a professionally trained and educated individual with a knowledge of plant material and engineering.
Landscape architect.
Yes, your landscape architects. And these people usually have a master's degree as their terminal degree. Very rarely do you see a PhD. But there are landscape architects that will go on and get their doctorate. So they don't have to, but there are some that do that. I have a friend in Miami, Florida, that is a landscape architect. And sometimes one of the things that we discuss is they're doing the architectural elements with the hardscape. We talk about the hardscape, the walls, the retaining walls, the pavers, the fountains, the water features, all that. And sometimes they end up putting plant material in the wrong place. It looks nice, but they don't. One of the common concerns sometimes is the LA, as we call them, their LAs, sometimes don't know their plant material well enough to make it something that the plant material is really going to thrive. And so this is one of Andrew, his name is Andrew Georgiadis, and this is one of his great pet peeves. He was on the landscape architecture faculty at the University of Miami in Coral Gables. So it's kind of cool because he uses University of Florida extension materials to help guide him in his planning with his plant materials in those projects. So very fascinating. So always glad to hear someone using extension resources. Okay, a body of practical guidance for using and mixing colors. I'm thinking this one, right? Yep, there you go. Basically is knowing your palettes, knowing your complements, knowing your monochromatics. It's the art piece of this part, is knowing the different shadings, whether you want to make bold statements, whether you want to complement, whether you want to do the shades of orange, like we talked about in containers. Someone liked different grades of orange. And so, that's really important. So this is the art side of the profession that goes with the science. So it's very important for us to enjoy and love. Okay, the quality of how a surface feels or appears, such as coarse, rough, smooth,
Texture.
or fine. There's your texture. Your texture can be something you see, it can be something you feel. It could be you walking on a texture. But the hardscape can be part of your texture too. The look can soften or it can sharpen part of the landscape. Your plant materials can soften or sharpen at different grades. So it's not just an on and off switch. There are different grades of that texture. So, and another piece of the art part of employing that look. So a person with horticulture experience, formally and informally indicated, who often works on small landscape projects.
Landscape
That's
design.
your designer. So that's good. Because these are the people that do know their plant materials, and they have a professional and a personal background. So it's not just teaching out of a book. They have professional experience working with this plant material. They know their combinations. They know their right place, right plant, right environment. All those pieces come together. Exactly. So a seamless linkage between diverse features to create blending, such as the way plants and other elements are related to one another in a landscape.
Interconnection.
You bet. And sometimes you'll see a landscape where something's just added in. It just doesn't look right, like it's out of place or it's obnoxious. It takes away from the look. And I see this, I drive past this in town. There is a landscape that was done, a small yard in North Platte, and someone put these portable kind of wrought iron fence pieces up. And it totally obstructs what you're looking at in the landscape, because all you see is these portable panels that have been put in. And so you're looking at that and you're not looking at the plant materials, you're not looking at the flow, you're looking at this house and you're looking at all of these panels. So that's where that's where the interconnection is too stark, in my opinion. So
Maybe they have a doggy.
no, well, they might.
Trying to
They
get
might have a
noticed.
copy, but, there are some people that are kind of amateur landscapers in town that put that together, and then they sold the house. So that's the only reason why. It's beginning work, and there's not the interconnectedness, there's not the flow. It's just boom, the stark thing with the gate in the front yard. So it takes time. This is a field that takes time and experience and success and failure to understand all the nuances to make a landscape truly beautiful. It doesn't happen overnight. Some people have that general knowledge and have that knack, and others just kind of plunk things in. So this is kind of one of those where that feature is kind of just plunked in and a little too obvious. So A map or a design that shows the general layout and possibilities for a landscape. That is your concept. That is what we can basically start on. We have a concept, just like think of it as a rough draft. Think of it as brainstorming. And so that's when you take that concept drawing to someone, and you can critique it, and you have that back and forth discussion, and you can start moving elements around, or, whether it's for the client or who it is. So remember, a landscape never is totally finished, because it evolves over time, and then that'll change. Okay. So the craft of arranging aquatic plants and hardscape materials in a pleasing manner. Yes. You're aquascaping. This is not necessarily digging a hole and putting in a stock tank in the ground and putting bricks around it. That's not what this is. This is taking it above a level. But for the sake of simplicity, a lot of people do that. But this is where you've got the art form, so it looks natural. It looks like a natural pond. It's not like we dug a hole in the ground and plunked something in and put rock around it. So
You're starting to hurt my feelings.
oh, oh, they're way worse that could just rip you apart. It's learning the nuances to make it really flow pretty. How many of you have ever seen a berm? And how many of you seen a berm that looks like someone buried a horse in the middle of a piece of property? That's not what a berm is supposed to be. It should accentuate, it should have general flow. It should lead the eye somewhere else, either to attract something. It should give it more angles, multi-dimension than just a flat surface. But we had our neighbor next door in our first home in North Platte. The person who originally built that house put the mound in, and it looked like someone had buried a horse. That's not a berm. It just takes time. It's like an artist. This is the art piece that makes things beautifully flow. And so it's actually your son's property. Yeah, so I can pick on it because it's one of our master gardeners, her son. We used to live next to her son, and it's just like, my gosh, it's this long oval, straight. It's like a Quonset, like straight up and down, no feature. It just boom. And so they eventually broke it down and got enough other features in it that kind of softened this parabola. Right on a flat piece of ground, they just boom. So, and I'm being nice. There are people that can be extremely nasty about this because they're very picky with art with it. So, an individual who installs and maintains landscape elements. Yes, these are your contractors. And this is one of those, if you're going to hire a landscape contractor, go get references. Go get references, ask for their portfolios, ask for their projects that they have done, and pictures and drawings of their work before you sign on the dotted line. Please, 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 please do that. So it's very important to do that. So that will help you. That will give you a flavor of their style and how they're going to put a project together on the property that you're working with. So, okay, the prominence given to something, such as a focal point in a design. This is pretty easy to pick out. This is your emphasis. So this is where, you can have a focal point. The focal point could be plant material. Focal point could be a feature in the landscape. Maybe it's a hill, maybe it's a slope, maybe it's a berm. You know, a nicely established berm that's what you want to accentuate, and you're going to plan around. So you're going to plan around a feature. So maybe it's going to be a water feature. So you're going to plan that landscape around that emphasis. So. Okay, a series of loosely drawn circles that divide spaces into areas that will be decided on by a designer. Yes. Functional meaning it's a working document that you're going to be moving around and working. And so it may mark how much space a series of shrubs are going to take up and what it's going to look like, the way they're going to design them and plan them. And they're going to have them color coded as to what the plant materials are. So all the elements, whether you have shrubs or perennials or annuals or hardscape, you know, that's all going to be done to scale, and it's going to show what that base is going to look like. And so it's going to look like a base drawing. It's not going to all be filled in. It's a base drawing, and it gives people kind of perspective of where things are kind of going to lay out. Okay. A landscape that collects runoff water and pollutants, filters out pollutants, and slowly releases the water. That is your rain garden. And that is one where, in our case, we have a rain garden next to the extension office here in North Platte, and that is going to be able to absorb 1 inch of water, of precipitation off of our building, off of our roof, and we'll be able to hold and drain it within 24 hours. So we have to build the basin of our rain garden within the capacity of what's going to come off that roof. So how much water is 1 inch off of the roof of this building? That dictated how big our rain garden basin had to be to hold that 1 inch rain drain off of it. And the idea is that it's going to absorb that plant, that's going to absorb that moisture, and it is going to filter out everything that came off the roof, for instance, or the pavement. So that's really important. So it's those effluents are not going into the city sewer system. That is the idea when they do rain gardening around parking lots or in island medians, is it's catching the runoff and it's filtering through the soil instead of going straight into the city sewer system. So you will see some beautiful ones in cities, and that's what it's doing, is it is controlling the runoff and reducing effluents. A map showing a site with details of the landscape and its structures.
Base plan?
Let's check it out and see what it says. Yep, you're right. It's got the details of the landscape. It's this is your base that you're going to build on. You have your working document of your working structures, and then you have the base plan as you're getting all the pieces together. So you notice that there are lots of different documents that come together that overlay into a landscape. So if you think of these as overlying documents that change and move around until you get to something final. So that's really important. So, okay, the size and placement of objects to create depth and distance in the design, such as the foreground, midground, or background in a landscape.
Perspective.
Yes, and this is really good. When you get your perspective, you can really make things multidimensional and have it some depth instead of just and not. I think that one landscape that bothers me in town is that there's no depth to it. That there's no. It's just a flat piece of ground that they tilled up and made flower beds on the edge of the sidewalk, and they plunked this fence down. There's nothing, there's no depth, there's no breadth. to it, and that fence looks so harsh. And so that is one thing that is missing. And it's like there's something missing here. There's got to be something that leads the eye. Where's the eye going to? The eye as your eyes are going all over the place looking for something that's just not there. That something's missing. So kind of like fixing your favorite an and you're missing an essential set of spices, if that makes sense. Okay, a water element that is housed in a vessel and can contain plants and aquatic animals. And that's pretty obvious, container water garden. And you can do these really easy. These are so much fun. And it's kind of like, they're a lot like the container garden themselves, except for you are doing aquatic plants instead of herbaceous plants mostly, or the hardscape with the timbers. Sometimes you can put, you can really be creative with the water features as well, but they are definitely something that is something very interesting. You don't have to rip open your yard to have a nice water feature. It can be a fun design that you use to enjoy. So the next one is some matching. And remember how we did, these are the terms. I got some flowers in here too.
I'm guessing the flower has a long stem, a spike, or linear form would be a money flower.
E. Okay. So here we get into floral design a little bit, but yeah, it does. And so you can go into picking plant material that's going to produce a certain type of flower because of its form, its shape, and that changes textures. And so that's important to know in the landscape as well as what you're going to wear, when I got married, so that's important. So.
All right, there is the root here, small little
Corsage?
Or is that
Wait a minute, it's worn on the lapel.
Lapel, I'm guessing that's going to be your boutonniere. Yeah, because they're small. They're usually not as big. It's not the grandma's Mother's Day orchid corsage. An arrangement of flowers pinned onto clothing or worn on the wrist. There's your other one, because some people have wrist corsages. So I have not thought about any of that kind of stuff in years, but that makes a lot. J is your boutonniere, so. But remember when people used to do orchids. That was a big thing to give mom and grandma an orchid corsage for Mother's Day. Or, now this ages one of my colleagues, but one of my old colleagues at K-State in the horticulture club for homecoming in the 1970s, they used to build football mum corsages. And have you ever seen a football mum? These things are, gosh, big, and they were fancy. And so, that was quite a bit. That was a really good fundraiser for the horticulture club back in the day when that was really popular. So we can talk about some really cool, pieces and memories. So, okay, so any other things?
the line design.
Line mass design.
A floral arrangement that emphasizes lines rather than plant material.
What is it? Oh, line mass design.
I think the line design.
Anyone online have an idea or a thought? Line design, do you think it's L? Anyone want to look it up?
I think we
Anyone?
should go for line design.
You think line design? I think that's probably where we're at, but you never know.
I'd say I is rhythm.
A pattern of repeating or alternating elements in a rhythm. This suggests a sense of movement. That is really important. This is an element in landscape design that goes along with repetition that we sometimes forget or we don't do a good enough job of, is to have that. That's really important. Okay, on line design, I'm going to learn to do better. I'm going to put a capital L because it doesn't recognize the lowercase l. So you want some rhythm, you want some repetition, and that will be in your extension circulars that I sent you. So these guys are all in here. All those elements are in that publication. So, okay.
I was thinking B was harmony.
B. Yeah, it very well could be. What do you think? On harmony is B. In floral design, a pleasing interaction or blending of elements in this design. You will also see harmony in the landscape where things blend and they complement each other. They will also have the rhythm where there will be some repetition, usually in odd numbers. Remember how we talked in the design part of our containers where we have a 1, which will be your thriller, and then your spillers and your fillers can be 3s, 5s, and 7s. And if you have a big enough container, you might have a 9 floating in there. So we tend to go in odd numbers, and we will repeat those numbers throughout the landscape. Okay?
B, line mass design.
Yeah, D, a floral arrangement in which there's a mixture of line and mass designed in the use. That's pretty obvious. And you will have times where you will mass plant material in for an effect. The one classic example that we see right now are your bulbs. There, you will see people that will plant tulips in a row, and you'll have a row of tulips. But a lot of times, if you want to see the really pretty effect, especially in the Netherlands, you will see a big field of tulips massed together, or you'll see designs where you have a mass in the spring of beautiful tulips that come up. And one example was I was in the International Master Gardener Conference in 2011, and we toured the State House grounds in Charleston, West Virginia, around the West Virginia State Capitol building. And they have gardeners that gave us a tour, and they were retired veterans. It was a wonderful project that they took on that loved this work. And what they did is after the tulips bloomed, they dug them up and they sold them. And that was a fundraiser for the state to bring in new plant material. And so that was a good plan, and it worked out really good for them. So it's kind of like if you go down to the Cotton Bowl, the old Cotton Bowl around Dallas on the Texas State Fairgrounds, they will have tulips blooming, beautiful. But it doesn't get cold enough to vernalize them, to make them go through a cold period to bloom the next season. So they dig them up and they treat them as an annual. So just another fun, kind of random thing, but just trying to explain some of this. But massing is really pretty. Massing with, a mass of tulips blooming is just, that's where it's really breathtaking, where you have a mass together. Okay.
CB.
C, proportion.
E, proportion.
C,
C, the relative sizes and amounts of an element in a design. Yes. Because you want things in proportion. You want it to be in relative proportion to each other. And that is including your hardscape as well as your plant materials, and also your plant materials in proportion with your permanent structures such as a home or a building. So you're not going to plant little grape hyacinths, a field of grape hyacinths, right up against a two-story building. That's not proportion. That's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to get something that has proportion to that two-story permanent structure, for instance. So, okay, anything else?
Mass flower, I think, is F.
Yes, a closed form single flower that is dense and round shape, precisely. This would be, at Memorial time, would be our peonies, massing peonies. And if you've ever seen the beautiful yards that have a collection of peonies, they're just gorgeous. And they're massed. They're pretty for Memorial time generally around here in this part of the state. And then they're done. And then we hope something else of interest comes up in the landscape so we have continuous floral interest. Okay. Anything else? That you see?
H is mechanics.
Yes, it is. There you go. The device and techniques that keep floral placements secure and stable in a design. And you have different types of mechanics that you can use. You can use those foam blocks. You can use those, what we used to call a frog. Remember hearing about the frogs? That little metal spikes in them that you would place your, they usually down, it looks like a little porcupine. And you would place the flowers in there, and that was called a frog. So, and I don't work on the floral end of the side, so I don't keep up on that kind of stuff, but I remember that being something back in the 80s and the 90s where you had these little metal things in the arrangements that would hold those certain stems together, because not all your stems are the same, and so you're going to have to use different materials in your mechanics to hold them in place. So G-line, a visual path that creates a foundation, shape, or form of a floral arrangement. Yeah, kind of running out of things here.
What's A? Must be
Yeah.
Since it says hedgerow in it.
Yeah, hedgerow. Hedgerow. Yeah. Hedgerow. Yeah, we're, we can look up some of these pictures too. So we had A buried in here. So I'll check those. Bingo, we got them all. So what I'm going to do is I will do like we did last time, is I'm going to take a screenshot and I'll make a copy of it and I'll send it off to you. So that has been one of the neatest tools that we've had the ability to use here. So that I really enjoy having the ability to do that. So I'm going to quick copy and paste this over and drop it out. So we got that. So we're going to go back, go to our classroom, and then look and see what's next. And so we'll look up hedgerow and we'll look up hedgerow, hedgerow, hedgerow.
Not the growl, it's the. Sometimes you growl at the growl.
Has anyone had any questions come up in your thoughts as we're going through all this? Or any questions from your reading or anything that Elizabeth will talk about in class? Mhm.
I have a flower garden here that has regular grass in it.
Mhm.
I'm just gonna have to take it all out, till it and start over.
Mhm.
And right now it's got that row of tulips popping,
Mhm.
huge massive area.
Mhm.
Can I dig enough right to be room to throw them up in the ground?
The question is, can you dig up tulips after they bloom and reset them? And the answer is yes, you can. So you let them bloom, you let them die, you trim the dead flower and the stem off, and then you're going to dig under and get as every bit of that root system as possible. Now, remember, bulbs like tulips are a geophytic structure, and they're like a lung because they will look big in the fall, big and round, but when they bloom, all the energy has been contracted. And so your bulb's not going to be very big. So always remember that you take the width of the bulb times 2, and that is the depth that you plant it back at. So
Can you leave them in a container just to sit there and get bigger and get nutrients in the summer and then find them back in the fall?
the question is, can you deadhead flowers such as your hyacinths and your tulips that are in those bulb pans and hold them, water them, take care of them, and then plant them in the fall? The answer is yes, you can do that. They will dry out really quick with a lot of the peat that they're mixed in with. So you'll have to constantly keep that moist, but they will still have their foliage, and you just let that foliage just hang around. Don't trim it because you're going to lose nutrients. So just leave them there, and then you can replant them in the fall. So we think starting, after a little bit after Labor Day is the time to be planting those guys and taking care of them. So, and remember, you're going to fertilize your bulbs in the fall. So you're going to fertilize those fellas in the ground in the fall. So we have the energy for that geophytic structure to expand back out. Because how many times have some of you seen a row of tulips or daffodils, for that matter, or anything, where you've got the foliage, but it never produces a bloom? That's what happens when they haven't been fertilized over the years. So just those structures are just so small. They send up growth, but that's about it.
Somebody
So
didn't tell my dad today, so he's been ground 25 years. You don't know what fertilizer is.
some do and some don't.
Fertile soil.
Yeah, some do and some don't. It's like you'll see those random ones in a yard where, they just never produced a flower stalk. They just don't have enough oomph to
Are
do
you
that.
better off to take all the blooms off though, after they bloom?
Yes, it's called
So that
deadheading.
Yeah, deadhead them, so.
Mhm. So after they're spent, you can clip
Seed.
the dead bloom and the stem off. So perfectly good. So the next one, the last set is our flashcards. So this is kind of a fun one where it shows you the terms. So absolute scale, and we saw that, is, now I'm going to go backwards and I'm going to miss it. So, okay, the quantity of being plain, natural, or uncomplicated. And so that's simplicity. And that's just a simple term. Okay, the question is, what type of fertilizer, liquid or pellet? I prefer to use the dry, and I water it in for fall bulbs. So I tend to use dry fertilizer, and then I will water it in. Repetition, because we talked about repetition, is the reoccurrence of an event or things such as repeated elements within the landscape. But repetition and rhythm kind of go hand in hand, don't they? So you have repeating elements, but it also shows movement. So you can make repetition and they really should walk hand in hand. They really should complement. Unless you want something that's very stark every so often that has no movement, but you would like the eye to move. You like the plant material to seem like it's moving, but you also want your eye to move. So you can do those things in design that tricks the eye to follow. And you can use that with hardscapes, with a path or a certain planting that goes a direction. So it makes it travel. So it's kind of amazing. It's kind of like when you plant something up against a house, you always want to make sure you pull it out another 3.5 feet. Remember that little rule? Because our eyes always trick us to planting stuff in way too close up against a structure. So my best example is the Alberta spruce that grew up into someone's house up against the side of the house. And they literally took a chainsaw and cut out the area so the eaves could go through. So please don't do that. So that happens. Okay, we talked about simplicity. And simplicity, there's something to be said about simplicity. The less is more has more of an impact on the landscape. So we talked about texture a little bit informally, but it is the quality of how surface feels or appears. So if you want something to soften something up, so maybe you want to use a tree species such as a locust that has lots of leaflets, for example, that would bring in filtered light. That would be a use of texture off of the tree leaves to soften the landscape, Or maybe you want something to accentuate the height or break up the height of an element. So maybe you have a tall brick wall and you want something that also is going to grow tall that'll kind of soften it or break up all that height. So that's an example of that. Okay, absolute scale. And this was in our Jeopardy, but was not an answer. And so absolute scale is the true size of the object. So, it's going to grow 6 feet, we're going to mark it as 6 feet in our scale. Now this is it. So this is what it's going to be in comparison to everything else. Aquascaping, we've already worked through that, and that's the arranging those of aquatic plants and the hardscape together in a pleasing manner. So it looks, for me, it has to look as natural as possible. And I have a couple out-of-state publications on aquascaping. Would anyone be interested in looking at them?
Yes, please.
We can send it out. You can look at it. And of course, these are southern. These are from the south. Plant materials are going to be totally different, but it gives you the idea of how they arrange things to look natural. And we don't have anything like this here in Nebraska. So I'm at mercy of looking at some other pieces. So I can send you those. So use them for the mechanics, the mechanical part of that concept. And we'll have to do the research on the plant material that's better fit. Okay, base plan, we've already worked through that. A map showing a site with details of the landscape and its structures. So that is so that's what your base plan is. It's kind of like it's a foundational piece of, this is where the house is. This is where your driveway is. This is where the sidewalk comes through. These are where the property lines are. Color theory, we've already went through color theory, is the practical guidance for using and mixing of colors. And I will show you that Colorado State publication on color, since we're already thinking about it tonight. Concept plan, remember all these kind of layer on top of each other. So, they're going to layer on each other to give you the final product in the end. but it is the concept, it's the basic idea. This is the brainstorming that someone comes up with, your rough draft that you're going to bring as your concept in to give some ideas, gain information from whoever's sitting on your committee or your team, and then you can make adjustments to that. So it's it is not a final piece. It's a concept. It's a working document that you can adjust. Okay, container water garden, we've talked about that. It's the absolute vessel. So something that's going to hold the water, it's going to hold the aquatic plants and, any animals such as, people usually think of fish to put in there, but you will be amazed of the different wildlife that will come into a landscape, whether you have a container water garden or a water feature that they are attracted to. So that's kind of cool. So if you're wanting to bring in wildlife, that's a great way to bring it in. So emphasis, we talked about that, prominence. And so it may be something that you want to show off, or maybe it's a focal point, or maybe it's the gable on a house. Maybe it's a turret, maybe your porch, your wraparound porch is going to be your focal point. And what's going to make that, what pieces in the design are going to accentuate that focal point? It can be a hardscape, it can be a permanent structure, it can be a plant material. So your functional diagram, it's loosely drawn circles that divide spaces that will be decided. So you kind of got this working body. You have your concept, and then you're going to put your circles in, and it kind of gives you it kind of puts the meat on the bones. Does that make sense? You have your bones, and then you're going to put some meat on it, and you can kind of move it around and show you how much space you've got to work with. So that's an important one. The graphic, it's your pictorial representation of the plan. So that's more of a all-encompassing piece right here. But it's the pictorial representation, something that you're going to present more of a formal final project or product. The interconnection, which I feel is very important to making things look a little bit more finished, natural, polished, not so stark. It's a seamless linkage between the features that blend. So this is the gentle sloping berm that accentuates. It's not stark, it's not harsh. And it looks natural, like it should. It looks like it should be there. How does that sound? Does that make sense? In class, online, does that make sense? Like it looks like it's meant to be there. Does that make sense to you all? It's kind of like, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I get it. Okay. So, of course, your landscape architect, that is your professional that has the training that does, and we hope that they know their knowledge of their plant material as well as the engineering, so they can do the drawing, they can do the hardscape, they can do all that. They can grade the land if they need to grade the land. If they need to make the bowl for the rain garden, they can do that part, but they also need to have that knowledge of the plant material so it has success. And putting the right plant in the right place in the right environment under the right conditions. So, okay, your contractor is the individual who installs. And we have some people that is all their career is they are installers, that they have a great working knowledge of all those plants. They make that design come to life and they do a good job of it. And that's really, you get, the old saying, you get what you pay for. You definitely get what you pay for with a good contractor, whether it be a construction in your house or a landscape design. You get what you pay for with a good contractor. So, and sometimes, and I have had cases with this on a project closer to home for me, was a design that made that landscape look mature overnight. And it was something that a committee was kind of pushing for, And I said, this is beautiful right now, but in about 3 years, we're going to have some reconstructive work to do because things are going, they're not static. Plant material is going to change and it's going to grow and it's going to adapt. And so that design was going to be one in 3 years, you're going to have to take apart and redo a little bit. And so we had to ask the hard question with the committee, are you willing in 3 years to take this all apart? But they really loved the fact that it was just going to look like, ta-da, and there will be people, especially businesses, high-end businesses, that will go for that immediate mature landscape look, that ta-da moment. Usually they have money to wipe everything out in 3 years and do it all over again. So, but for the rest of us that don't have that kind of money, we're going to we're going to have to work with the plant materials as it changes. So our designer, this is the person with the expertise that often works with small landscape projects. This is the person that has the knowledge of the art and the science of the plant materials, what works together, what combinations work together. They have practical experience as well as the formal class experience, but they also have the good functional, they know what's going to work in real life scenarios. So you can never undervaluate these people. They're too important. Perspective is another one that's really important. It is the placement of objects to create that depth and design. This helps create that natural look like it's meant to be. This is where perspective and interconnectedness walk hand in hand, like our scale, our rhythm walks together with, there's pairs. That they walk hand in hand. They should complement each other and strengthen the design. So that's why we want to do that. So your preliminary design is the map that breaks down the concept and includes more thorough details. So this is another layer of meat on the bones. So you have your concept, and then you're adding some pieces, and you add a few more pieces. So it's starting to take shape. So it's like as you layer things over, then you see it all coming together. So I really like that, when we talk about the design. And I'm not a designer by trade. That's not my strength, but when you see something good. And have you ever, online as well as in person, ever seen something that looks good? They hit it out of the park. A design that is just beautiful. And it looks effortless. It just looks effortless. And so that's kind of that, it's that intangible. It's that what I call the it factor in design. It's just got it. Sometimes it's a little hard to describe. Of course, our rain gardens. And so this is where your architect is going to have a piece. They have engineering experience, so they're going to be able to calculate how much water is going to come off of the roof of this building and an inch rain event. And so that is going to calculate how much of an area and how much grade and slope that basin has to be to hold that 1 inch rain event, precipitation event, within a 24-hour period and let it drain out. So, and also have plants that will be able to survive sitting in water for 24 hours and then go away. So, relative scale, which we see all the time, it's the size of an element of the landscape in relation to each other. So, our little gray hyacinths are going to go be 4 inches tall versus the fountain that's going to be 10. So, that's going to give you the relative scale of everything that gives you kind of a perspective, especially in a 3D format. And now we have landscape design software that shows us that scale. So it's not just a bird's eye view onto a landscape drawing, but it gives you multi-dimensions. Okay, this is repetition, and this what runs with rhythm. Hand in hand, reoccurrence of an element or thing, such as repeated elements within a landscape. So simplicity, we've already talked about simplicity of being plain, natural, and uncomplicated. The more complicated, when we think about complicated, I see in my mind more of the formal English gardens with the hedgerows. That is formal, that is more complex, with all the different things going on. But also, if you've ever seen some of those English gardens, you can see the beautiful work of the hedgerows and the shrubs, and you don't see a lot of other things going on. That's where the simplicity is. And so less is more in a lot of cases. But then again, it's an art form. So it may look beautiful to me and someone says, not my type. So, it just depends. And so that's why you got to know what you're working with, what kind of project you're working with, who you're working with, and their desires. So you're producing a product that is pleasing to them. Because in some ways, you're going to guide. You're going to guide with plant materials and hardscapes and all these features, but it's still theirs in the end. It's not yours. They're going to have to live with it. Whether it's 3 years and they rip it out and redo something later, or something that's going to last 50. And we've seen landscapes here in our communities that have lasted 4 years, and they look like they're a little bit of a warp in time because they have hung on, and they've been that way ever since the early 60s when they were put in, and they were the cat's meow. But that was what design was in that era. And so I kind of look at that. I see that in communities. You can tell where different neighborhoods were put in and what was popular by the house as well as the landscape. Sometimes the landscapes are intact. Sometimes they've been altered. And so you can see how that's been changed. So sometimes the alterations look really good, and sometimes it's kind of haphazard where you don't have that beautiful flow anymore. But so it's interesting. If you've ever wanted to see differences of landscapes, look at historical pictures of the White House grounds over 2 centuries now, how they changed and how they evolved and how they were redesigned. So that was really a fascinating thing. Yeah, you had the formal fencing. The gates were put up at different times. Some extra security pieces were put in partially in the late 1890s when Grover Cleveland's wife had young children. They put up the gates because she was out on the White House grounds, and people were so excited to see the Cleveland children that they literally picked the kid up from the staff and walked away with them. And so they had to put that up as security, but that became an element of that design that they worked around, and they never moved that after Frances Cleveland put that in for her own security. And so, I'm trying to think back, different ones did different styles. There were some colonial gardens put in by really around 1900, everything really started, people started really taking more care of the gardens around, especially on the south portico of the White House, where you have the Truman balcony. That first started with Edith Roosevelt after the White House was renovated in 1902, had more of a colonial gardens type of theme. And then the first Mrs. Wilson, Edith Wilson, was an artist, and they used the garden concept design at Princeton University, and they put in the big reflecting pools and the statuary, and it was very period at the time that looked really good, clear up till about the 1930s. That kind of hung around through the 20s and into the 30s, and then the landscape changed again during FDR's years, and during World War II, many things were just left pretty static because of the war effort. And then they were changed when the White House was reopened again in 1952, when it went through a major renovation. The grounds went through a renovation. And then by the time Jackie Kennedy came to the White House 10 years later, she put in the famous Rose Garden. And so you hear about the Jackie Kennedy Rose Garden. And so things just constantly changed and shifted and moved. Lady Bird Johnson put in a children's garden on the grounds for her grandson as a parting gift when they left the White House, clear on up to Michelle Obama's vegetable garden that went in because that was part of her project about having people eating locally grown produce and better nutrition. So if you ever want to see a landscape that was a kaleidoscope, look at old historical pictures of the White House grounds, and you'll see the different elements that we're talking about. And so if you want to take some really cool national pride, there's actually some picture books of the White House landscape. If you want to buy, it's like a coffee table book, or maybe you'll find it at your local library and see how much it changed. So like there was a big story about Andrew Jackson's magnolia that he had planted, and over time it had died, but they kept on making cuttings. And so the original rootstock is still there. So the original tree has died, but they cloned it through graftings. And now that magnolia is still there, that original one that Andrew Jackson planted in the 1820s. So it's fascinating. So for all of you who are landscape design people, that's one of them. That's one of the big landmarks in the United States to see how beautiful it changed over time. And they had really cool designs. None of them were bad. They just changed. People had different ideas. The styles changed. You know, things kind of sat dormant during the 30s when we had the Depression and people didn't spend money. And definitely not during World War II because we were just hanging on with the war effort. And, oh, I forgot, Edith Wilson, the second Mrs. Wilson, to cut down on groundskeepers, she had a flock of sheep graze the White House lawn. And so that was used to keep, fewer staff. And then the wool off of those sheep were sold as a fundraiser to give to the American Red Cross. So I'm sorry, just weird factoids, but it makes sense how a landscape is a living creature that evolves and changes over time. And so that's, I guess if there's a sermon, there's my sermon tonight. So, okay, so we're out of Google Classroom. Do you want to look at some of these publications? I'll show you some. This is the protection of landscape plants. This is one of the extension circulars that you were sent last week or on Monday for you to download. And I will tell you, for some reason, you have the cover, and for some reason, pages 1 and 2 with some of the credits are blank. Don't worry, because the guts of the publication start here on page 3. So it's all there. So, so that's a nice publication. It talks about, making sure you don't have girdling roots and protecting from wildlife damage and, reducing compaction. Lots of good common sense recommendations that will help you in diagnosing plant problems in the landscape over time. Just really good reading. So the next one I wanted to show you, you're talking about water gardens, and we'll see if it's still around. This is a publication from Auburn Extension. It is water gardening, and I'm trying to see where it is. If it's still around, they may have taken it off. And they might have. If not, I have a copy. I have a hard copy in my office that I've kept, but it was a really good one on base planning. This is, it was a really good one. So the other one was from LSU Ag Center. So granted, these plants are not, plant material is not going to be what we're going to be working with here in Nebraska, but the concepts are good. So here you go. And here's the publication. And so It has a lot of good things. Of course, this is the art part that goes along with the function, but when I give you an out-of-state publication, I'm going to be very specific on what you're going to look for, because you know the plant material is not going to work. But water gardening is a piece that people are going to ask about, and this has great information to show you. And it talks about the structures. And once again, imagine location. Remember, right plant, right place. You put something like this in, you've got to make sure you've got it in the right spot. So lots of good reading, not something that I would necessarily give out to the public, but I expect you to be keepers of information and glean what's important, such as the construction piece, off of this for your own personal knowledge. And then you apply it in Nebraska terms. Does that make sense? So, but there's lots of good, it's an easy read. And it's talking about working with the liners, because a lot of times you'll get the liners, you can buy the liners, and those are great. Those look more natural, and you can make the ones look, you can make a stock tank look natural. You just don't just put bricks around it. Do some of these other elements to make it look a little nicer. Then it also talks about putting in waterfalls, because a lot of these elements do have waterfalls in them, and it talks about how you put, for instance, how do you install the liner, how do you install the pump, and the soil level. It's really very handy. There's a lot of great information here that shows you those pieces. So I'm going to send this to you in good faith that you will not just send this out to everyone, but learn and glean the good information off of it, if that makes sense. Okay, the other one that I wanted to show you was Container Gardens from Colorado State. And this is where they have the color wheel that's going to come up. Come on, maybe not. Okay, here it is. My internet's kind of blocking some pieces. It's kind of interesting here. Okay. So this is another one that's good, but I use it more for the colors. We talk about the, the weight, the size, the mixes. These are all things that we have talked about in Nebraska. And so that's really good. There's some other pieces here that also will work good, especially those of us who are all, close to the Colorado line, out in the Panhandle, makes sense. And this is where I want to talk with the design basics and then the color wheel. And so you think about your complements, orange and blue are complements because they're across the wheel. So that's when we talk about those. So that's really important. So there's a reason why red and green look good together. They're complements. And so this is one of the pieces I wanted to show you, because it talks about some things to avoid in design. And so it gives you some good basic pieces to kind of hold on to share. So I think that's really important, and for you to take an advisement. So taking advantage of a variety of colors. Foliage can vary from silver gray, red, many shades of green, including green, yellow, green, and blue green, and tawny beige. So think about things that are going to be there in the winter as they die down. You can let a container garden die down that's going to have different colors and different textures. So you can use that beige color, what it dies down to, especially your grasses and your sedges. And then also they're really good to catch snow. When you leave plant material to die in the garden, especially your perennial grasses, it helps pull snow down to the base of the plant and it melts, and it helps provide a little moisture. And also what we call winter interest. So your landscape has some winter interest going on, kind of like our little blue stem out here in front of the Research Center building provides winter interest for us, you know, not just during the growing season, but it looks pretty in the winter. So those are some pieces that other publications have not taught us that I wanted to share with you. So that's really important. So that's some really good pieces that talk about, you know, they talk about using the foliage plants and how to incorporate them. And Terry did talk about that in her presentation, and this reinforces it. So there's some really good pieces that reinforce what Terry was teaching you in her presentation. So I will piece these together to you to send off. So anything else that you come to mind that you would like me to send, because tomorrow morning, after I do my video blog with Sandra Barrera, I will be putting together your quiz and your videos and a big long stack of stuff. So anything else resource-wise that you would like to talk about or want me to dig up? Because I'm constantly digging up goodies. So very few things are off limits when coming to look for extension resources.
What do you do with poinsettias in summer when you keep them for much fall? Because it seems to me all the leaves fall off and you have stems. Is that correct?
Yes, we had a question about poinsettias and what do you do with them after the holiday season is over. So you can keep your poinsettias in your containers and they're going to be, you're going to keep them, you know, the potting mix moist, not overly wet. They're basically going to kind of retrain themselves a little bit. The bract part, which we inadvertently call leaves, will turn green as the day length expands again. And so that's nothing wrong with them. They're just turning green. They're losing their color because that's a function of, you know, day length and night length. And I usually put them in kind of a northeast exposure, keep them moist. You can actually dig the pot into the soil and plant them pot and all temporarily, where you know they're going to be taken care of. Partially shade, yeah. Don't put them out in baking sun, you'll kill them. So, and then you can, you know, when it comes fall time, you want to inspect the plants. You can inspect the plants, make sure they don't have any insects crawling in them, bring them back in and love them, and they will start to change color again as the days grow shorter and the nights grow longer. So, would you like me?
Sticking in the dark, hiding
That's what you want us to
Yeah.
do.
You can trick them.
I have got them to bloom before.
Yeah, you can get them to recolor back up. And the blooms on the poinsettia are right in the center. They're an inconspicuous blossom, but that is the blossom of a poinsettia.
The greenery there about the garden is really nice.
They grow pretty thick,
Great.
They have
The-
artificial flowers and stick them so they're not spoiled.
but they will green up. They will fill out
Yeah,
again,
push out.
and they will become thicker and fuller than what they were originally from the holiday season if you take care of them. And you can get a bigger plant to take back inside, but please inspect them for insects and diseases before you bring something in. So, but I can also send that also if you wanted to rejuvenate. Also amaryllis. If you have an amaryllis that bloomed and you cut the stalk off and you got a plant, similar kind of situation, because amaryllis, if you take care of them, can last for years. And some amaryllis have been handed down like the Christmas cactus, the true Christmas cactus, from generation to generation. So they can go for years if you take care of them right. So yeah, so lots of stuff, lots of goodies. So because I'm excited to share all this information with you to look at and give you some idea. And you know, maybe it greases the wheel for some ideas in your own landscape that you want to do. So I like dredging up anything that anyone wants to learn about. So. Any other questions, comments? Unmute yourself. Share something. Ask questions or say, David, you're way off the mark. Give a yell. So this is your time to ask questions and get information and share. Do you have information on varieties of speedwell, Veronica? There probably are some. So let me go share. Let me go back to share screen. And we can look that up. So, and there are different forms of Veronica. And these are Veronica flower, not people. There's some people in here too. This is Spike Speedwell, for instance, is Veronica spicata. And so this is from the plant box from North Carolina State Extension. And so there's some cool information and they have some cultivars in here. So I can look that up, Elaine, because there are different species of Veronica that look well, that look good, not look well.
Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, this is kind of like open mic night, so please ask questions. So here's one just on Veronica itself. And so we have different ones here. So this is their plant toolbox, which is really a good one that North Carolina State has put together because it gives you all the cultural information that's really nice about it. And so this is a great little resource to borrow. It also has the plant tags. So it's a summer flower, it's deer resistant, it's butterfly friendly, it's bee friendly. It's a winter annual weed. Farther south it'd freeze here and be done. But this plant toolbox is great. The hollyhock, the best way to transplant it, hollyhocks spread really good by seed. So seed is probably one of the best ways to do it, but as you know, with hollyhocks, they drop their seed and you have all these little hollyhocks floating around. So what's really important is to dig under and get as much of the soil and not disturb its root system on those new starts, and then you can replant them. So if you're going to plant a transplant or something that reseeded itself, always take as much soil around it and get all of its root system. And the little ones are easy to do. And then you can plant them and you can transplant them. Always transplant around 5 o'clock or so. Don't transplant in the heat of the day because they go through horrible transplant shock. Let them have some time in the evening, get acclimated to the new spot. Okay, next question. UNL upcoming plant sales. Are you talking about Spring Affair, Marcia? Is that the one you're thinking about? Yes. Spring Affair is through the statewide Arboretum, and that is at the Lancaster Events Center. Spring Affair, David. (2021). This is the fundraiser for the statewide Arboretum. And it is a good one. It is coming up. So here is your information. April 18th. You can become a member of the statewide Arboretum. You do not have to be a member to buy plants. You can sign up. Sometimes they have had a preview party the night before, and I do not know if they have a preview party this year or not. It is fabulous. It is the Black Friday of plant sales. People bring grocery carts and wagons and strollers. And if you see something you like that you moderately like, you grab it because it'll probably be gone once you leave. So if you have anything that you remotely want, you just grab it and take it. And of course, I'm telling you this, and that violates every rule of right plant, right place, or, you know, oh, this is really cool. This is where you get your joy from shopping. Or that's what I call it. So go and find that plant material, you know,
David,
get a hold of it.
They're doing that virtually this year, and they have a list of plants that will be there, and you can put your order in, and then there will be a pickup date and time, and you just drive
Yes.
in with your vehicle, and they put the plants in your vehicle.
Which is
COVID-19, yeah,
really nice. And here's your link. If you're seeing on the screen, this is the online plant store. You can start shopping.
Okay, thank you. I see that. Thank you, Nancy.
So go ahead.
welcome.
Some people are ready to go out and dig and go buy right now. And others are okay with going there in person. So all pickups will be on East Campus in Lincoln, with the exception of May 15th, which will take place in Omaha, at the Douglas Harpy County Extension Office. So you can tell.
And I believe all of the plants that are there are still grown at Bluebird Nursery. If you've ever
Yes.
had a chance to tour that nursery, it would be a wonderful day trip. And people there are very helpful to help us learn.
Yes, up in Clarkson, Nebraska.
Yes.
And that's a huge operation.
It always, when I lived in the eastern part of Nebraska, it was always a great way to start our gardening year. When they are having it in person, the Lincoln Gardening Club served a gourmet meal the night before the big plant sale.
Yes,
And-
that was the preview party.
Yes, and that was for 100 people by reservation only. And it was so, you know, anytime you're in a room of fanatics, no matter what the subject, it's very exciting. And there were people that would come that could not even sit down and eat the gourmet meal before they were climbing over everybody, because we get first dibs at the plants that night. Now they're going to be the very same plants the next day, but you know, it was a good
That's
way
right.
to begin your gardening season.
And you can drink, they usually have wine and cheese and appetizers. And so not only are you looking at the plants, but you're getting your wine and cheese fix and
That was the Lincoln Gardening Club's biggest fundraiser of the year, was that gourmet meal the night before. It
it's
was,
a neat environment. You also have presentations from different groups
Yes.
that you'll also get the chance to be part of if you go. So, and it
Not
is the
this year.
main fundraiser for the statewide Arboretum, which is a good group to support.
hopefully they'll be able to get together live again next year, because it's an amazing experience. We would go down and stay and go to the garden club's gourmet meal the night before, and then the next day everybody comes to the plant sale, and they have other vendors there that are related to gardening. And then after a few years they started doing one in Kearney. I don't know if they're still doing theirs or not this year, of course, but so and that would be a little later, and so, you know, a lot of us hit both of them.
Yeah,
So-
this is where you get your fix.
Yeah,
And-
it's fun to be with our other gardeners, because somebody would come and say, have you ever grown this plant? Yeah. Well, where did you grow it? How did it, you know, you just learn a lot from each other too.
It's a fantastic group to talk with, and absolute strangers will ask questions and you'll strike up conversations, and And you'll ask where did you get this? And they'll say, oh, over here, over here, over here. Also, the horticulture club also will be selling plants. So this is a great way to support UNL horticulture
And
students.
you knew that any plant you bought, because it was grown in Nebraska for Nebraska, you probably were going to have, market success with whatever you bought. So
Correct.
that's a good thing to know too, and good healthy plants and ready to go.
Mhm. They will also be selling trees from the statewide arboretum at Spring Affair. So you can also pick up trees, which is nice. And those are species that actually work in Nebraska. So
The
yeah, it's a
NRD
win-win.
It's probably too late now, but a good place to pick up trees for very, very inexpensively and grown also right here in Nebraska, most of them at Bessie, is with your local NRD. It's probably too late, although sometimes they have some left over and you can get some then, but they'll be
Mhm.
like $1 or $2 a piece for those. They're small, of course, but they grow really well, and they're meant to be grown in Nebraska.
The small guys tend to transplant better because they have a higher proportion of the root system intact. People that buy the 12-foot trees, remember these 12-foot trees have a root system that's going to go 3 times the height out in every direction. So a 12-foot tree is going to have a 36-foot root span in every direction. Well, that's not what you get with your 12-foot tree in the basket. So your smaller trees, even though they take a little bit longer, they adapt. They're going to take off a little easier. But we'll talk about that in the tree class too. So, but any other questions? We'd love to hear people unmute and talk in the class here. So more than just me talking.
Potatoes, they said their pH should be 5 to 5.5. If you put it in the ground and you add a well-aged cow manure around them and be successful in that without thinking about bacteria, can you just do that once they get going?
The question is on potatoes, and we need a minimum soil temperature of 50 degrees to plant. And so we're getting there here and across this part of the state. We're not quite there. We're getting close after the warm few days helped. But the question is on the pH. It's always good to incorporate the aged manure here in the spring, and then you can plant your potatoes in there. That shouldn't be a problem because it's the 90-degree, it's 90 days from harvest. Or it's not 90, it's 180. So 180 for commercial growers that are selling to someone else. So, but yeah, we do not side dress with manure.
Okay.
So we pre-plant. So if you incorporate your manure, and then let things grow. Mhm. So. Anything else? Anything else? If not, I'm going to stop the recording for tonight.